Hello guys, and welcome once again to my channel, and in today's video we're going to be looking at PHP Slim version 4. In the last few months or so, I've had a couple of comments of people requesting for me to do a video on PHP Slim version 4. Before I actually get into the content of this video, I'd like to say if you have not subscribed to my channel right here, please smash the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell whenever I publish any new video so that you get notifications, and also you can drop your suggestions for the kind of videos you would like to see me make. Alright, so I'm just going to go into this video right now. I'm going to go straight to the comments. And this is supposed to be going to mute this. And let me just go straight to the comments here. And yep, we had, why didn't you use version 4? We also had another comment here of somebody requesting, you're great. Thanks so much. Definitely would love to see a version if you have the time. Alright, so Steve Lewis and Shenawi, here is your request, PHP Slim version 4. So guys, here is the finished product of what we are basically going to be building. I am not allowed to have access to this with this modal. And guess what? Even if I were to close this modal and let's say I try to create a guest here and I am not currently authenticated and I agree to the terms and conditions and I hit submit, this guy is going to come up again and ask me to log in. So basically, I cannot perform any operation until I am logged in. So for me to log in, I'm going to just enter my email. And for my password, all right, and login. And right now you can see user login successful, and you can see our Jwt token. All right, so we can just have that closed. So right now I am logged in. If I close this right now and I try to create a new guest, let's try and create Namdi, and then the email is at gmail.com, and then we can enter some comments here about Namdi, and then agree to the terms. Submit, and your entry was successful. Guest entry data created successfully. So basically, if I just head over to view all guests, you can see all the guests that we have created here. All the guests that we have created here. And you can see right here the Namdi which we created just now. You can see the email we used and then the text that we enter. We can very easily edit this, and Namdi Kenechukwu, right? Kenechukwu. And you can also see here that we are returning the total number of guests, 7 guests. And I'm also going to accept this. And if I save this, it's been saved successfully. If I head back over to home, not home, sorry, view all guests, because if you go to home, you want to create a new guest. So I'm going to head over to view all guests. And right in view all guests, if I scroll down to the bottom again, you're going to see that Namdi Kenechukwu is what has been edited. And now if I click on delete, you can see it's going to ask me, are you sure you want to delete this? I can either click on no and then this modal goes away. And if I click on yes, you can see automatically that Namdi's data has been deleted. We're going to go straight from the documentation to installation right here. And in the installation, you can see that all I need to do is to grab this. And I'm going to here and just pull up the terminal. And I'm going to run this command. And so guys, here we have it. We have successfully installed PHP Slim version 4 according to the documentation here. But we are going to still need a couple of things. We're going to need the Slim PSR 7. So I'm also going to grab this right now and move this in here. And this are not compulsory, Gozo and Gozo HTTP, not really. Okay, so while we are waiting for this, okay, so this is done installing. So that's Slim PSR 7. We are also going to install a couple of things, and I'm just going to update my composer.json file for those dependencies that we are going to be installing. So we're going to need PHP DI. And for some of you who are wondering what PHP DI is, it's a dependency injection container. So we're going to work with 6.1 for this video. Then we are also going to need a package that works really well too with PHP DI Slim, which is our PHP DI Slim Bridge. So PHP DI Slim Bridge, and this is going to be 3.0 or later. Okay, so another package we are also going to make use of is our respect validation. So if you did follow me in my version 3, you realize respect validation was what we used for validating user input. And then the last package we are going to set here is going to be our Jwt Packages. And the first is our Tupola Slim Jwt Auth. And for this, we are going to need 3.5 and later. And then the second is our Firebase Jwt package, and for this we're going to need 5.2 and above. Okay, so I think the last package we're going to need, which I did forget, is actually Laravel's Eloquent ORM. So we're going to make use of that, which is Illuminate. So Illuminate database, and this would give us ORM within our Slim application. Okay, so now that we have set up all the dependencies that we need within the application, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run composer update. Okay, so right now we have all our dependencies installed. And if you wanted to make use of PHP unit, you could add that as one of your dependencies for required development. All right, but for this application, we're not going to write in any test. If you want to see a video on how to, you make use of PHP unit in PHP Slim, you can just drop a comment below and I'll make a video on that. All right, so what we're going to do right now is we want to be able to set up our namespaces. So basically, we want to be able to set up from where we can write our namespaces and all that stuff. And so for us to be able to do that, we would have to set an auto load here. So I'm going to set an auto load, and for our auto load, I'm going to call our PS, make use of PSR4 here. And of course, I've not created a folder right now, but we are going to be auto loading every single thing within the app, and it's going to be app /. So basically what this is going to do for us is whenever we are within the app folder, we can make use of namespacings to pull up packages, to basically import packages and all that stuff. Okay, so right now I'm going to save this. And once I've done this, I'm going to start creating the folders that we are going to need for this application. All right, so right within our root folder, we are going to need a new folder here, a new directory here called app. All right, so this is our app folder here. And then we are also going to need another directory here called config, of course, where all our configurations are going to go in. And we are going to need another directory here called public. So right within our public, we are going to be calling our index.php file and setting up our .htaccess file for Apache configurations. Okay, so right now we have 3 different folders. Right within our folder here, I'm going to create a new PHP file, and I'm going to call this index.php, and just cancel that for now. And in here too, I'm also going to have a new file, and this is going to be my .htaccess. Index.php file is pretty simple. It's just going to require a particular file, and that file is going to be my bootstrap.php, but right now we don't have that file yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get into my htaccess, and I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to get the htaccess file. Let me see. Yes. So I'm going to, let's see, Slim version, Slim 3 API. And I'm going to go into this public directory, and yep. So right within this htaccess, I'm going to copy this right now. So paste this in here. So basically what this is doing is it's just going to write, it's going to reroute whatever all requests down to the index.php. And then the index.php is going to be responsible for moving to which route and to which route not. And then this here is to help us set our HTTP authorization headers when we'll be passing in our bearer and our token for our JWT authentication. Okay, so I'm going to save this right now. And in our index.php, all we're going to be doing in here is we're going to be requiring our bootstrap file, bootstrap.php, which bootstraps the whole application. So I'm going to create that file in here, and I'm going to call this bootstrap, right? Bootstrap.php. Okay, so our bootstrap.php file is going to be exactly where we are going to make use of our dependency injection containers, and we're also going to call our autoload.php to load all our packages. Okay, so right here, I'm going to call our DI container, and next up is going to be our DI Slim Bridge container. And for this, I'm going to just call this our Slim App Factory. Okay, so our bridge is going to be our Slim App Factory, and then I'm going to require our vendor. So yes, let's require our vendor is about 2 steps backward. So vendor autoload.php. And we have an error here. That's because we didn't place this here. Okay, so now that I've required our vendor, I'll have to create an instance of our DI container. And yep, our instance of our DI container. And then next up is I'm going to create our application. So to create our application, I'm going to have to call our Slim App Factory. and I'm going to call the create method, and this create method I'm going to pass our container here. All right, so now that we have our app created, or an instance of our application created, what I want to do now is I'm going to run our application. Okay, so right now, if I save this, I'm going to go back to our index.php, and right here I can now require config bootstrap.php. Okay, so right now we have this from our config bootstrap.php, and our config bootstrap.php is right here. And why am I having this? Let's see, what is that? Create directory config not found. Okay, yeah, that's because of my import here. So yep, now it's saying bootstrap, create file bootstrap.php. Okay, oh yep, that's true. Let's rename this because refactor rename. So I spelled this wrongly. It's supposed to be boot, like bootstrap, all right? Bootstrap. So refactor that, and yep, now this error disappears. So now we have our index.php fine, and we've set up our bootstrap.php here. We'll then go on to set up our database configuration. So I'm going to have a new PHP file here, and I'm going to call this database. And our database file here, I'm going to have a variable I'm going to call database config, and this is going to take an array. All right, and I'm going to return database config, and our array here is going to have our driver. So our driver, of course, is MySQL we are going to be using. So our driver here is MySQL. Then our host is my local host right now. So that's going to be 127.0.0.1. And then the database here, I'm going to call this slim v4 app, and our username is root. Then our password, my password here is blank. And then for the child set, it's going to be UTF-8. So UTF-8 collection UTF-8 Unicode CI, and that should do. Okay, or let's just add the prefix, although it's not so necessary, but let's just add it. Okay, so right now we have successfully declared our database parameters. Next up is we are going to have a couple of settings, and within that settings we want to be able to pass our database settings. All right, so within that settings you can set a whole lot of things, but within that settings we are only going to be setting just our database within the settings. Okay, so right here I'm going to have a new PHP file here, and I'm going to call this settings.php. And in our settings.php, I'm going to make use of our PSR container interface, and I'm going to return a function here, and this function is going to have our container interface and as container. And let's not forget our semicolon here so PHP can stop crying like a baby. So I'm going to say container and set. So we want to set this to our settings, and this is going to be a function. All right, so I'm going to drop my semicolon in here, and for this I'm going to have my DB here, which is going to require once our database directory. So our database directory is /database.php, and now I can simply return an array here that will have our DB passing our DB object. Okay, so right here we now have our container interface that helps us set our database configuration within our settings. So we are going to go back into our bootstrap.php, and we want our database configuration to not just to be able to reflect within our application. And so to do that, before we create our application or run our application, we are going to call our settings here. So our settings is going to require once directory and our settings, and we are then going to just inject our container in here. The next step is we are going to be setting up our middleware, and so I'm going to be creating a new file here, and I'm going to call this sorry, not a new directory, but rather a new file, PHP file, and this is going to be called middleware.php. And before we actually do anything in our middleware, I just remembered something which is very important. Since we are going to be making use of Laravel's Eloquent ORM, then within our database.php, we would not return this here anymore. Rather, we are going to make use of Laravel's Eloquent, which is called capsule. This is eliminate database capsule manager. Yes. Okay, so eliminate database capsule manager, and now we are going to add our database connection, which is our database config, and then we are going to set this as global, and we are last going to put Eloquent because we want to make use of Eloquent's ORM, and now we are then going to return the capsule. Okay, so now that should do. So now let's get back into middleware. So for our middleware here, a couple of things that we want to set up in our middleware. First off, we want to make use of our routing middleware. We also want to have our custom calls middleware, which we are going to create. And then we also need an error middleware so that we can be able to see the errors that drop. So the first thing we want to do is we need to get our Slim app. Okay, and now we would return a function here. And our function would inject our app here, and within our app we are going to add our route middleware. So add routing middleware here. All right, we are also going to add our error handling middleware. So add error middleware, and we're going to pass true. Okay, so now you can see the first is to display error details. We want it to display error details. We want to be able to log errors. I want to log error details. For now, this is what our middleware is going to look like. Of course, later on, we're going to add our calls middleware, custom calls middleware, which we're going to create. And then we are going to set up our Tupola Jwt middleware. Okay, so I'm just going to save this now. And right within our bootstrap.php, we are going to call our middleware just right here before our application runs. And our middleware is going to require, let's call the directory, and middleware.php. Okay, so we are then going to wrap our app or inject our app into our middleware. And last of them all is going to be our route. So our route is going to be where we are going to define all our routes. So I'm going to have a new PHP file here, and this will be route.php. Okay, so for now we are not going to be doing much in here, but we will definitely need a couple of things like our response interface and our server request interface. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to import let me just write response interface. Yep, now this is much better and this is faster. So let's just import this. And our server request interface, so I'm going to call a server request interface, and yep, this is, and of course our Slim application. And for now this should do. So I'm going to have a function here, and our function is going to pass our app instance, and we can then define certain basic routes here. So let me just define our post route, and our post route here we're going to call this create guest, and in here we're going to have our guest entry controller, which we don't yet have, and that would have a function here called create guest. Okay, so let's just have one route, but what I'm going to do is let me just comment this out since we've not created this, so that we don't have any errors. So basically we have declared our route, or we have defined our routes to PHP, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to head back in here, and the same thing we did for our middleware, yeah, we're going to do the same thing for our routes. So require once, this is a directory, and let's see routes to PHP, and our routes is going to pass our app. Okay, so right now I'm going to save this. And before I move any further, because we would want to test our applications, or want to test our application, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder here, or a new directory here, and I'm going to call this controllers. All right, so of course, we would need to set up certain routes so that when we hit those routes or those endpoints on Postman, you know, we could definitely get a response to show us that our application works perfectly. So the first controller I'm going to create here is a controller. This is going to be our guest entry controller. Okay, so if you watched my version 3 video, you're going to notice that we also had a guest entry controller. So guest entry controller, and our guest entry controller here is going to be namespaced in our app controllers. Use psr/http message response interface as response, and we are also going to use the same, not exactly the same, but quite similar, and this is going to be our request interface. So our request, and let's just define our class here, guest entry controller, and we're going to have a constructor here, public function construct, and for now nothing within our constructor, so we are all then going to create a function here. So for this function, I'm going to call this create guest. So we are going to hit this endpoint to test. So I'm going to uncomment this now. So we have guest entry controller. We need to import this here. So use app controllers guest entry controller. Okay. So now this error flies away. So now let's just get back into our guest entry controller. And what we are going to do in our guest entry controller is really simple. We're just going to return a JSON 200 HTTP server response. But what I'm going to do is, before I return this, I'm going to get into our app here. And not to waste so much time, I'm just going to get back here. And let's go into our app. And this is from version 3. Let's go into our response. And yep, custom response. So I'm going to copy everything in here. So copy that right now. Get back in here, and I'm going to have a new directory here, and I'm going to call this response. And right within our response, I'm going to create a new file, and this is going to be called our custom response.php. Yep, and I'm going to paste this in here. Okay, so basically all our custom response is doing is just returning a response as well as a response message. Okay, so these are a response message, and the response is our response interface. All right, so now that we have this set up, what I'm going to do now is right within our guest entry controller, I'm going to have a variable here, and this is going to be protected, and custom response. Yep, and here I'm going to say this custom response, and this would be our new custom response. Okay, and here I'm going to have a response message, and our response message here is going to say this route works. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to return this custom response is 200 response, and we need to pass our request and our response interface. And so right up here, I'm going to have our request as request, and response as response, so that we can just pass this in here and pass our response message. And we want to test if everything works just fine. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move into our public directory. In our public directory, I'm going to say php start server and localhost. Yep, 888. Okay, so we have started our server. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get back here, and I'm going to get me Postman. And right in Postman, I'm going to just go to port 888. And here I'm going to call create guest. And of course, this is a post request. And I click on send. And we have an error here saying class DI container not found on bootstrap.php on line 7. Alright, so let's just head back here and bootstrap.php on line 7. And that is probably because of this is supposed to be a capital letter and I'm using a small letter. So let me save that again and head back here. And I hit that endpoint again. And here you can see right now that we have a success of true and a response of this route works. So it's clear to us that our application works just as we want our application to work. Okay, so right now what we are going to do is we are going to go back to our guest entry controller, and here I'm going to just comment these 2 lines here, and I'm going to then go into our app folder. And within our app folder, I'm going to create a couple of folders here. So the first folder the first directory I'm going to create here is going to be our response directory. Okay, directory with response already exists. Okay, yep. So let's just create our request then. So this directory is going to be our request directory. And then we are also going to create our middleware directory. And next is going to be our models directory. So our models directory. And then we are then going to create our interface directory. Okay, so now we have set up all the directories that we require. So I'm going to start off first of all with our request directory. And for our request directory, I'm going to have a new function here, or a new PHP class here. And I'm going to call this custom request handler. Okay, so right within our custom request handler, what I'm going to do here within this class is I'm going to have a function here. So it's going to be a static function, public static function, and I'm going to call this function getParam. So basically our getParam is going to help us with whatever request that is going to be sent to our application. So this is going to take our request, it's going to take the key, and then and then the default, which we will set by default to null. Okay, so within our function here, the first thing we want to do is we want to check to see if the request is a post param. So basically, when I mean a post param, is it a post request? Is it a push? Is it a patch request? Is it like every single thing that has to do with posting data? Whether it's a push request, whether it's a patch request, whether it's a put request. And for that, we are going to call get past body. We are also going to get param to just get the get parameters too using this request handler here too. So I'm going to call get query params. Okay, so yep. So now we have our post params and our get param. And then we are also going to get body. So basically, if the data that the user is sending is neither a post request nor a get request, but is like in the format of like a JSON data. So we're going to use get body, and we're going to JSON encode, because most of the times the data we're going to be sending is going to be JSON encoded strings or JSON data. So we want to use get body to pass the whole body. So for this, I'm going to make use of our get body function. So our get body function, and then here I'm going to set this to true, so that this is JSON encoded to true. Okay, so next up is I'm going to have a parameter or a variable here that I'm going to call result, that I'll set to default. So basically, if it doesn't meet any of these, then result should just be null. So basically, what we are going to return at the end of our application should just be null. So we're going to first of all check to see if this is an array. So if post parameter is an array, and it is also set, so post parameters key, because they always have key value pairs. So if the post parameter key and the post parameter is an array and the key is set, basically like when you have your $_post as an array and the key of that value pair is set, we then want to have the result mapped to our post params, and then we pass our key in here. Okay, so but else if is basically we are talking about the body here that we have JSON encoded. So if get body, that's basically an array and it's set, the keys of our get bodies is set, so we are calling. And why am I just making key? So I shouldn't key. Okay, so the key is set. So basically here we want the result to be the value of our get body with the key passed in here. All right, we're going to have another else if here, and else if it's a get param. So basically, if it's a get param, basically query strings, we are going to also pass the key, because they also have their keys too, and then we're going to set the result to that value. So get params, and we're going to pass the key here. Okay, so now we are just going to return the results. All right, so we have our function perfectly set up. One more thing is we want to namespace this before we just move out. So we are going to move requests. And now that we have namespaced our application, what I'm going to do is, in order for us to be able to handle parameters that will be passed, basically we are expecting JSON parameters. And if you come back in here to our function here, you can see that apart from the fact that we're handling both normal push request and get request, we are also handling JSON data here, and we are setting whatever is the result to the value of that JSON data. So we are definitely going to need our custom request handler if we are going to need to work with JSON data, which is how we're going to be communicating from our Postman down to our application. So right here, let's come down over here. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to comment this, but what I'm going to do is I am going to call our custom request handler just to see it works. And I'm going to call get param, and I'm going to pass request here, and I'm going to pass a string of say name. Let's just have this name here, and I'm going to assign this to a variable, and that variable is going to be username. Okay, so instead of passing this response message here, I'm going to pass username here. So we're going to test our function to see if it works just as expected. So I'm going to head over to Postman and hit that again. And we have an error here saying call to undefined method get body. That is a mistake on our path. This is, let's see, yep, get body here. So get body. And back here, I just send this. And you can see our response is null. And that is because we did not pass any value. And if we go back to our function here, you can see right here that we set the default value to null. So if it meets none of these parameters, the value will be set to null. So what I can do right now is I'm going to just go into body here, and let's see, let's just have a name here, and this name is going to be Pascal. And now I hit the send button, and here it returns for us a response of null. So it's obvious that our function is not working as it should. So I'm going to head back in here, and I'm going to go into our getParam function. And if it's an array, post param. If it's an array, get body. Oh yes, we are actually missing one else if here. Okay, so I'm going to just have the else if here. So because this is going to be converted to an object, and we didn't check for an object, so we're going to say if is an object. If it's an object post params, and not just that, if it's an object post params, we are also going to check for the property. So, and property exists, basically the key. So post params. So we're going to check if the key we are passing basically for that post parameter exists. All right. So if it's an object, our post params here, which we are passing, basically, if it is an object and the property exists, then what we can now do is we're going to set results to be the value of our post params and the key. And I'm missing my $sign here. And so now that we have made this change by adding is object here and the property of the object exists, I'm going to head back over here and I'm going to test this right now. And here you can see we have the value of what we just passed in here. Okay, so now that this is set, the next thing we are going to do is we are going to set up our database and our tables. So I'm going to head back over here, and we already, okay, so I've already created a database here before now called SlimV4App, which is exactly the same name with our database, the PHP here, SlimV4App, okay? So right now we're going to create our table, and we're going to have two tables here, one for user and the other for guest entry. And so for this table, we're going to call this user, and here we're going to have an ID, and yep, this is going to be a primary key. This is going to be auto incremented, yes. And then the next is we are going to have an email here, and of course this is not null. We don't want our emails to be null. And then we are then going to have our password here too, and our password too is also going to be not null. Then we're going to have created at and updated at. And created at would be date time, and same goes to updated at too. And this too would also be date time. Okay, so now that we have successfully created our user, I'm going to save this right now. Created updated primary keys ID. So I'm going to apply this, and now we can see here that we have our user table here. Okay, so I'm going to close this, and I'm going to create our second table. And our second table is going to be our guest entry table. And for our guest entry table here, we're going to have an ID 2, and this is going to be integer primary key, not null, auto increment. And then we are going to have full name, so various characters. This would be not null, yes. Then we are also going to have email here, and this is also not null. And then the last is going to be the comments. Okay, so this is we should just leave this optional for now. And created at, updated at. Since we are using Laravel's Eloquent, created at and updated at are like something that we should create by default. Else, if we try to perform an insert, especially when we're doing multiple inserts, it's going to break. So it's not going to allow us to do the insert. So created that is various characters. This is date time, not various characters. Sorry, date time, and updated at here. Updated at, so this is date time. Okay, so we have created the second table. So I'm going to apply this right now. And I have an error here saying there was an error by applying the script to the database. Create guest entry ID incorrect table definition tier can only be one auto column and it must be defined as the primary key. Okay. So yep, we are missing out on setting this as the primary key. Since we set auto increment, it has to be the primary key. So I'm gonna apply this now, and now if I refresh now, this should do. Yep. So we have guest entry and we have user. So now we have created the two tables. We're going to rush back to our code base. And the first thing I want to do is I want to create our models basically. So I'm going to create two model classes. So PHP class. And the first model class is going to be guest entry. And I'm going to save this right now. And right in here, we are going to namespace this. So our namespace is going to be our models. Right, and then we are also going to make use of Laravel's eloquent model. So eloquent model, and this is going to extend, oh sorry, where am I typing? This is going to extend model. So I'm going to save this right now, and I'm having once this has extended our model, we can now define the table that we basically want this to be attached to. So I'm going to call the guest entry table, which was the table we set, and then I'm going to set the fillable property of our model, and we're going to set the full name, the email, right, and the comment. And we are then also going to create another model here. So I'm going to call new PHP class, and yep, namespace app models, and the name of the class is user. So this is going to be our user, and this is going to, we need this, so let me copy this from here, and I'm going to import this in here. So eloquent model, and this is going to extend model, right, and the table for user is, I think, should be user, right? So let's just check to be sure. The table for user, yes, user. Okay, so the properties of this table, let's see, is email, password. Okay, just email and password are the two fillable properties. So we are going to set that now. So protected fillable, and we have email and password. And let's just add one more field here to make this look a little bit better. So I'm going to add a name field here. So what that means is I'm going to come back in here and just edit this. So I'm going to add a name field here and various characters and not none. And then I'm going to drag this, say, right after name. And I'm going to delete selected. Boom. All right, so I'm going to apply this right now. And let me just close this too. Now click on users, and yep, the name field is right here. Okay, so we have set our fillable properties. So let's get back over to our controllers, and in our guest entry controller, you can see we already created a function here called create guest, and within our routes we have create guest here. So what I'm going to do now is we'll simply call this guest entry. So let's create an instance of our guest entry model here first. So I'm going to say protected guest entry. Okay, so protected guest entry, and this guest entry is a new guest entry model. All right, so right here I'm going to call this guest entry, and I'm going to use the create method. Okay, so this create method, and I'm going to pass the parameters that we're expecting. So we're expecting a full name property, And this is going to custom request handler get param. So the parameter is the request object first, and then we can then pass the name property. So the next is going to be the email, and we're going to have custom request handler get param, and here we'll have request and then email. And then the last is the comment. Okay, so for the comment, we are going to call custom request handler get param, and we are going to call our request object, and this is going to be password. Sorry, not password, sir, but it's going to be the comment. Okay, so nothing here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to let's see. Let me first have a response message. So our response message here is going to say, guess the entry data created successfully. Created successfully. And then I'm going to call our custom response and 200 response. And it has the response and our response message. And I'm going to ensure that I return this. So I'm going to go into my database, the PHP, and this looks fine. Okay, so let me check my middleware. And yep, we actually missed something here. This is app. We want to call the settings within our middleware. So we're going to call our settings, basically the settings that we have set so that they can be accessible within the application. So we're going to call that on our middleware here. So get container, get settings. So now let's head back over to Postman. And right now, if I click on send, you can see here it says guest entry data created successfully. And if we head over here and I refresh that, you can see that we actually have this new user created. Okay, so right now we have successfully been able to create a new user. But what happens if, say, I got rid of comments now and I try to send this? You can see that we have an internal server error here. So this is basically reaching our eloquent ORM and it's trying to perform an insert, but because we did not set full name to null, and of course we don't want to set full name to null, full name should be required, it has to throw an exception. So what we can do right now is we are going to ensure that every single field that is being entered here is present. So in order for us to be able to do this, so basically what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to create a new folder within our app here, and I'm going to call this directory validator, or sorry, validation. And our validation directory, I'm going to have a new PHP class here, and this class is going to be called validator. Okay, so sorry, validator, and yep, validator. So our validator class is going to basically help us handle all our validations. All right, so the first thing I want to do right now is I want to pull in a respect validator, which we are going to be making use of. So this is going to be respect validation validator, and we want to alias this as respect. And then we are also going to use within respect validation nested validation error. So respect validation exceptions nested validation exception. Okay, and then we are going to make use of our own custom request handler so that we can be able to get the input that the user has entered. So here I'm going to have a protected request handler, and then I'm going to have a value where that helps me store, basically just store all the errors that we have. Okay, so this class is going to house a function called validate, right? And our validate function is going to take our request, and then it's going to take the rules that we are going to set basically. So those rules are going to be set for us by respect validation, or I'm going to put it this way, we're going to use respect validation to set up those rules. So basically what we will do now is we're going to call a for each loop here. So I'm going to say for each rules, all right, so basically what this is simply saying is for each of these rules, we want to check all our input based on each of these rules, and then we want to perform an assertion to be sure that each of our input pass each of the rules that have been mapped to that input. And then if it passes, fine, but if it doesn't pass, then we have a nested validation exception that helps us, store all the error messages within an array, and that's what we are going to display for the user. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is here I'm going to have a try, and then I'm going to have a catch. All right, and my catch here, nested validation exception. And yep, and so right now we are going to call our value, and we want to set the name property, and we want the first letter to be capital, so we're going to use the UC first, and we're going to pass the field. So basically the field of that's the key value for the key for the value. Okay, so now we want to assert, so we're going to assert to be sure that our custom request handler with the parameter passing our request object here and our field. Okay, so we are going to assert to see that it exactly meets up with the validation values that we have passed. So we call our value, which is this, and we are setting the name of the field to the one to set the first letter to capital. So that's why I'm using the UC first. So we're just basically doing the key value pairs, and then we are starting to see if the value that has been entered into our custom request handler get param, whatever is the field here, meets the authentication, meets the validation options that we have passed. And if this does not meet, all right, so what we can do now is we are going to have our errors, which is an array, and then we're going to pass the field here. So basically the field is going to be like, say maybe we call name, you're going to say name, then we're going to map it to the error message. So ex to the get message, or get messages, yes, get messages. All right, so if there's an error, fine, we call this, but if there's no error, then basically we just return our this instance here. So if there's an error, we call this, but if there's no error, then we do nothing. So basically, in order for us to be able to have method chaining, we have to return this here, this instance here. Okay, so we have to return our class instance, not outside here, sorry, within our function. All right, so that we can make use of method chaining. And then we are going to have another function, and this function is going to be called whenever it fails. So whenever the user input fails to meet with our validation, we are going to call this. So we're going to check to see if the array is empty. So if it's not empty, if the errors array is not empty, all right, so we basically will call this field here. So I'm just going to save this right now, and we're going to head back over to our guest entry controller, and what we are going to do is we are going to have a new variable here called validator. Okay, validator, and our validator is going to call our validator class. So new validator class. Let me go back to the validator class. I feel like we missed out on something. Yes, we've missed out on namespacing this, so let's just give this a namespace so that we won't have issues importing this. So app validator, and then we can come back over here, and let me just don't worry, let me get rid of this, and then we are going to use app, right, validator, and then validator. So right now we can just call our new validator in our constructor, and then that should do. All right, so what we can do now is, before we actually save this data, we are going to check to see if it meets up with certain conditions. And this is where respect validation comes in, and that's why respect validation is really awesome. So first, let's just import respect validation here. And sorry, not app, this is a respect validation, and then exception, nested validation exception. And then we are also going to import respect validation validator, and this is going to be V. So let's just call this V. Okay, so right here, before we actually send this to our database, we're going to validate the user input, and we are going to say this validator validate, and we are going to pass our request object here, and then an array. Okay, so the array of rules, basically just like we had here, in our validate function that took our request object and then the array of rules. Okay, so for our array of rules, we are going to say for the name property, we just want this not to be empty. So v not empty, yes. So it will check if name is not empty. For email, we are going to check for two conditions. First of all, is it shouldn't be empty, right? Email should not be empty. And then we are going to have a method change here, and then we are going to check if it's actually a valid email. All right, and then the last is going to be comment, and for comments we are going to check if it's not empty, basically, right? Not empty. Okay, so now we have defined our rules. So now let's go on to check if it fails. So that's where we are going to have our failed method here. So if this validator failed, so if it fails, then we don't want to continue with this operation. So basically we're going to set our response message to be our validator errors. All right, so our validator errors. Yes, our validator errors. And now that we have this after validator errors, we are going to return our custom response. This is going to be this is a 400 response error, not 400. Yes, 400 response, and we are going to pass our response object here, and then pass our response message, which is storing all our error messages. Okay, so right now, if I head back over to Postman, so let's move back to Postman, and now let's test this. If I hit the send button, you can see we have an error here saying class app validator could not be found on line 31 of our guest controller. So let's just check that out right now. It says app validator, so let me see. Yes, we have this namespace app validator. We have a request handler. Okay, so I see the error here. This is validation, not validator. Found in this validation. So this is validation. So let us change this now to app validation validator. Okay, so now let's head back here and hit send. And yep, you can see here that we have name must not be empty, email must be valid, and comments must not be empty. And that's because we have an error here. So let me get rid of that. Send now. Yep, you can see here that name and email were valid and comments must not be empty. If I try to say play around with this and hit send, you can see email must be a valid email and comments must not be empty. So you can see how we just made use of respect validation to basically validate the user input. All right, so now that we have our create guest done, we can then head over to other aspects of this, like say, this is create guest. So we're going to have another function here called view guest. So public function view guest. All right, view guest. And for our view guest, we are just going to pass our response because we are not dealing with any request here. So our view guest is going to take our response, and we're going to just call, say, guest entries, right? Guest entries, and we're going to say this guest entry gets. All right, so get will basically fetch all, or we could still just say paginate. If you wanted to make use of pagination, we could use paginate, and then we could just call per page here. All right, and set this to maybe a random number, but let's just leave it at get for now. So this guest entry gets. So this will just fetch all the details. Okay, so this guest entry gets, and then we are going to return our custom response with our data. So this custom response is 200 response, and we're going to pass our response here, and then our guest entry as our response, basically our response message. So that's for view guest. We are going to have another function here, another endpoint, and our second endpoint is going to be to edit existing guests. Okay, so now for editing existing guests, there are a couple of things that we want to make sure that they are passed. All right, and want to make sure that part of the URL is going to be the ID. Right, so to do that, remember that here we are expecting a request. All right, basically some data, so we'll pass the request interface. We are also expecting to show a response, so we'll also have our response interface here, and then we're going to pass the ID, which is basically what we are going to use to check to see which user we want to basically edit his data. All right, so now that we have this, we are just going to go through the process again. So we're going to validate, so validator validate. So we're going to validate, let's pass a request here, and we're going to validate the user input to be sure that the data that the user is sending. So let me just copy what we have here. So yep, we want to validate the following. So we're validating the name, the email, and then comments, right? And if validator fails, we want to end every operation and show an error message. All right, so let me just paste this in here. And if validator doesn't fail, then we want to edit this. And to edit this, we're going to use the edit eloquent function. So this gets entry, and then we are going to call this is where, yes. So where the ID meets the ID that we have passed here. So if the ID meets the ID, then we want to call the update method, right? So update method, similar to the create method, but it actually needs a where parameters or where clause. Okay, so for our updates, we are going to just copy what we have here too. So it's basically the same thing. And then we are going to paste that in here. And for our response message, we're going to set our response message to say content or say user was edited successfully. All right. And then we are going to return this custom response is 200 response. I'm going to pass our response and then our response interface and then our response message. All right, so we have we've done our create, we've done our read, we've done our edit, and now let's do our delete. And so we're going to have a function here, so public function delete guest, all right? And of course, this is going to have a response interface. And not just that, it's going to have our response interface. We would also need to pass the ID, as it would be, it's going to be our point of reference to delete any user. So we're going to use the delete method. So this gets entry, and where the ID meets the ID that we are requesting, or the ID that the user has sent to us, we're going to call delete. Okay, so right now we can now call our response message, and our response message is going to say just deleted successfully. All right, and then we are then going to just return this custom response is 200 response, passing our response object and our response message. Okay guys, so this is pretty cool. Now let's head over to set up the routes. Okay, so our next route here is going to be app, right? Get, and this is going to be view guest, and then we are going to, of course, the guest entry controller, which is our class, and then the method or the function is view guest. Right, so just to be sure, let's see, view guests, actually s at the end. So let us have this view guests. Okay, so the next route we are going to be setting up is going to be edit guest, and then the last is going to be delete guests. So for edit guest, I'm going to copy this right now and head over to routes, and then app. And for edit guest, this is going to be a patch request. All right, so this is going to be a patch request, and this is going to be edit single guest, since we are editing just a single guest. Or we could just call it edit guest. Anyway, it would do. Then we want to pass the ID. Remember right here that we have the ID here passed as a parameter. So we're going to pass that ID like so. And then for our array, which is going to have our class and our method, we are going to specify our edit guest method here. And then we'll have a delete here. Basically, our delete is just going to have our ID here too. So I'm going to say delete app delete, yes. And then for this, we're going to call delete guest, and then we'll pass the ID too. And we're also going to call guest entry controller, which is a class, and then we're going to pass our, oh sorry, I didn't copy this, so let me just copy this right now. We're going to pass our delete guest here, and let me just pass that in here, and now I'm going to save this. Okay, so this pretty looks fine, or this is pretty much good. Now we're going to head over to Postman to test each and every one of these endpoints. So right here in Postman, I'm going to be calling the endpoint. So the next endpoint after create guest has to be edit guest, right? So yes, edit guest, and then we are passing the ID as one of the parameters. So I'm going to head over to our database, and let's see, go to my schema, and then I'm going to get our guest entry table, and we only have one user here, and this ID is actually 5. So I'm going to copy that ID and pass that here, ID number 5. So we're going to be editing user number 5, and this is a patch request and not a post request. So I have edit guest, a patch request, and I'm passing the 5th ID. So let me just type Pascal Donald here. And now if I hit this button, we say comments must not be empty. Comments must not be empty. Okay, that is because, let's head back here. That's because under edit here, we're actually calling comments, and what we are expecting right here. All right, so edit guest comments, and what we actually are sending is comment. All right, so okay, it's comments. Okay, comments. Okay, so let's just change this to comments so that we can also change this to comments. So now if I hit the send button, you can see that we have user was edited successfully. And if I head back here and I refresh that, you can see what we have here is Pascal Donald. All right, so our edit endpoint works perfectly. So the next endpoint we are going to be looking at is going to be our delete endpoint. Is our delete? Sorry, not our delete. Oh boy, what am I saying? The next endpoint we're going to look at is going to be our view guests endpoint. So this returns a list of all the guests that we have here. And this is a get request. So I'm going to send this right now. And we have a 404 error here. And that is because of this. So let me send that again. And yep, you can see now that because we have only a single guest, it just returns a single guest. If we had multiple guests, it's going to return all the various guests that we have present. Okay, so and the last endpoint that we have here is delete guest, right? So delete guest, and let me pass ID of number 5. So delete guest with the ID of 5. So I'm gonna go. Is that a post request? No, that's a delete request, right? Yes. Our delete is a delete request. So if I hit delete right now, we have a 404 error here, and that is because our delete, let's say delete dash guest, and it passes our ID delete dash guest. Let me just copy you right now. Okay, so we missed the forward slash here, just to indicate that we are starting from the root. So delete dash guest, and then we have number 5, and hit that. Yes, and we have guest deleted successfully. And if I come over here and I just refresh this, you can see that we have no other guest existing. Okay guys, so we have successfully been able to set up our basic endpoints, create, view, edit, and delete. So the next thing we're going to be moving over to is to see how we can have this certain route protected. So basically, we don't want anybody hitting this route. If you watched my PHP Slim v3, you are going to see that we also did the same thing too for that video. All right, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to set up our middleware, basically our Jwt middleware, so that any request that comes in here, the Jwt middleware was going to intercept that request and then check to see if there's a presence of a token, and then we are also going to authenticate that token too. Okay, so if I head over to our composer.json, right, our composer.json here, you're going to see that we have this package here, slim jwt, which already helps us do exactly that. So we don't have to write our own middleware. All we just have to do is add that middleware as part of our middleware's present here. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say app here, and I'm going to add that middleware, and the middleware is Tupola. Oh boy, right? So yes, Tupola Jwt authentication. And right within the array that this middleware leaves for us, we're going to be setting up our configuration here. So the first thing that we want to do here is we want to basically ignore certain routes. So we want to be able to ignore certain routes within our application. I think the best way to go about this is, say maybe you can have like a namespace
of maybe a particular route, just that namespace alone. All right, and then without namespace, all the other routes that fall under that namespace will be protected. All right, but for this video, we're just going to do it this way. So we want this middleware to ignore our login route, and we also want this middleware to ignore our register route. All right, so we want you to ignore our login route, and we want you to ignore our register route. Okay, so as we right now we have set the routes that we want this middleware to ignore. Next up is we want to set up our Jwt secret key. And for our Jwt secret key, there are a couple of ways we could do this. We could use a .env file, which is basically the standard today. But for this video, I'm not going to be doing that. I'm just going to create an interface, just as I did in my last video. And that interface is going to have a constant, and that constant is going to be our Jwt secret. All right. So the beautiful thing about having constants in interfaces in PHP is that they cannot be overridden. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is within our interface folder here, I'm going to have, or basically I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this file secret key interface.php, just as I did in the last video. And so I'm going to namespace our app and our interface, right, which is the folder that we currently are in. So our app interface. And why are we having an error here? Because our folder is called interfaces. Okay, so now that we have that successfully, I'm going to declare our interface, and I'm going to call our interface just secret key interface. And our secret key interface is going to have a constant, and our constant is going to be our Jwt secret key. Okay, so for our Jwt secret key, I'm just going to have a very random set of text here, and that should be our Jwt secret key. So usually the best thing to do about this is you have like a complex string generator that will help you generate very random and complex strings, say maybe of capital letters, of numbers in complex manners. All right, or you could just write a very basic function that will do that for you. All right, but we're not going to do that here. We're just going to have just this random string here. Okay, so we're now going to head back into our middleware. For our secret, I'm going to call our secret key interface, and our secret key interface, and I'm going to call our Jwt secret. Okay, so our secret is going to be our secret key interface, our Jwt secret. And then next up is if there is an error. So basically, if the authentication doesn't go through, we want to have a function that handles that. So basically sets up our response, the response message we want to show the user. And for our response message, we are going to have a success here. All right, and our success, as you all know, for any HTTP response that you are getting from these APIs we have been building thus far, it always has a success. And if it fails, it returns false. If it's successful, it returns true. So we're going to have false because basically, if it gets to this part, then that means that the operation failed, which means there was a problem with the token, or the token was not present, or something. And then for our response, all right, so our response here, our response is going to be our argument, and then we are going to pass our message. So the message basically is a property of this argument, and this is coming from the Tupola Jwt middleware. So it basically handles the argument for us based on whatever is the error that it is picking up. All right, and then the last we are going to be returning is going to be our status code. So for our status code, status code, I'm going to set this to 401. Okay, so 401 meaning unauthenticated. Okay, so right now we have successfully set up our middleware, and there's just one last thing before we actually end this up, is we are going to return our response, and our response is going to come with headers. All right, and the headers are going to be application/JSON. So I'm going to say content type, and our content type is going to be application/JSON, and then we are going to return the body too. So we don't just want to set the headers, but we also want to return the body, and we are going to write the body in JSON. So I'm going to have right, and this is going to be JSON encoded, and we are going to pass our data, which contains all our error responses, and then we're going to have JSON on escape slashes, and then our JSON pretty string, right? So our JSON pretty string, pretty print, sorry, not pretty string, because we are basically writing that. All right, so I'm going to just put that in here, and now this looks fine. I'm going to save this, and if I head back over to Postman and watch what happens, I hit this route now, and you can see here it tells a success false, signature verification failed, status code 401. So now we have succeeded in being able to protect certain routes. So now we have to look at how we can generate our Jwt token to aid us authenticate before we can basically perform any action. Okay, so I'm going to head back in here, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new controller, and that controller is going to be responsible for generating our Jwt token. So I'm going to call this generate token, right? Token controller, right? Generate token controller, and let's see, guest entry controller, generate token controller, yes. PHP here, and then I'm going to set our namespace, which is our app controllers. Okay, and right in here I'm going to have our generate token controller, and this is going to implement our secret key interface. So basically the reason it's implementing our secret key interface is because we want to use our key here, our Jwt key, which we have set to generate our token. So I'm going to have a static function here, public static function, and this function is going to be called generate token. Okay, so generate token, and then we want to make use of the email to generate our token. So what I'm going to do here is basically the reason why I'm using the email is so that it can be unique. All right, you could use other things if you wanted to. So I'm going to set now to be the current time, and then what I want is I want to set how long this token is going to be before it expires. So I'm going to use str to time, and I'm going to say this should expire after about an hour, right? So you could set this for longer times if you care to, and then I'm going to pass now. So basically this is saying 1 hour from now let this token expire. Okay, so 1 hour from now this token should expire. So that's what I'm setting as the future, and we're going to set our payload, our Jwt payload. So our payload here is going to have our Jwt signatures, and then we're going to have our JTI here, which is going to be the email. All right, then we're going to have our IET, which is going to be now, which is when it will expire, and then we're going to have our EXP, sorry, which is the starting time. Then our EXP is when it will expire, which is going to be future. Okay, and right now we have set this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to return our Jwt token. So I'm going to use our Jwt, which is actually coming from our Firebase Jwt, and then I'm going to encode this. So I'm going to pass the payload, right, our payload, and then I'm going to pass our secret key. So I'm going to pass our secret key here, so secret, and we don't yet have this defined. So let me just define our secret key right now. So our secret key is going to be, since this is implementing this, so I can just call this. So I'm going to call our generate token controller, generate token, and then pass our email. All right. So this is going to be our generate token, and now we have our secret key, we have our payload, and then the last is going to be the hash algorithm. So I'm going to use the basic HS256 algorithm. So HS256, which is the algorithm, the standard basic algorithm for Jwt. So now, now that we have successfully done this, we want to be able to use this whenever a user, say, maybe logs in. All right. So in order to do that, I'm going to have a new controller here, and I'm going to call this controller auth controller. And our auth controller is exactly where we are going to perform our authentication actions. And remember, in our models, we already had a user model, and this user model is going to be the model we're going to be using to handle our user data. So within our auth controller, I'm going to namespace this first of all. So let's just set this up PHP, and I'm going to namespace our app, our controllers. All right. So here I'm going to have a class here called auth controller, and here our class, our auth controller here, and then I'm going to have a constructor. And right within our constructor, we are going to set up our user model and a couple of other things. So I'm going to have a protected user variable here, then our custom response, custom response, and then validator for validation. Okay, so right in here, I'm going to say user would be our user model. All right, then our custom response is going to be our custom response here, and then our validator is going to be our validator, which is basically the validator that we created in our validation validator. Okay, so now we have set these guys up. The first function I'm going to write here is going to be our login function. Or let's go with our register function first. So let's say public function register, and of course we would need to pass our request, but we don't have that imported yet. So let me just import that. So we're going to say request request interface. Yes, so request interface as request. So this is going to be called request, and then the next is our response interface, and our response interface as response.
The first thing we're going to do is, first of all, let's get back here. Since we have set up our request and our response interface, we're going to have them set here. So our request interface will have our request, and our response interface will have our response. And then we are going to validate user input first. So we'll need our validator validate. And the first is the request object, and then the next are the rules. So I'm going to pass our request object, and then the next is going to be our rules. And for our rules, we are just going to be looking for a couple of things here: the name, the email, and the password. So if I head over to our database, and then I just checked out our user table here, you're going to see the name, the email, and the password. All right, so the name, for the name, we are going to ensure that it's we also forgot to import our respect validation. So I'm going to say user respect validation validator. And in order to avoid conflicts, we're going to use this as V. All right, so what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to say for this guy, for name, it shouldn't be empty. Basically, that's all we want for name. And then for email, we want it that it shouldn't be empty, right? And it should also be an email too. And then for password, we just want password too not to be empty. So password should not be empty. And now that we have successfully set up our validator, we're going to check to see if this fails. So if this validator fails, so if it fails, then we have to show an error message here, and we'll have a response message. And our response message will take our validator errors. So we're going to call our errors right now. And then I'm going to return this custom response, and this is a 400 response, right? So I'm going to have our response object, and then the next is going to be our response message. Okay, so but if all that is fine, the next thing we want to check is this email already exists. All right, so for this email already exists, I'm going to have a new function here. So public function email exists. All right, and then we're going to pass our email param, and for email exists, we're going to check to see if this email already exists. So I'm going to have our user, and we want to check where the email property matches with the email that the user is ending, and want to actually count this. So if our count is 0, then we are going to return false, which means that the email is a new email, it doesn't exist. Otherwise, return true, which means that that email already exists. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to say let's see if this email exists, and I'm going to call our custom request handler, and get param, and we're going to pass our request object as the first parameter, and then the next is going to be the key, which is the email. So if this email exists, basically we want to have a response message here and say email already exists. All right, and then we would then return a custom response. So this custom response is 400 response. Then we'll pass our response object and then our response message. Okay, so if the email already exists, then we want to do this. Then the next thing we want to do is we want to hash the password before we save the password to the DB. So I'm going to have a variable here called password hash, and this is going to have we're going to create a new function just now called hash password that is going to take our password. So custom request handler get param, and then we can pass the request object, and then we can pass the key, which is the password. All right, so for the password, let me just do this right now, and I'm going to create a function which is a relatively simple function. All it just does is it just hashes the password for us. All right, so hash password, and we'll just pass the password, and then it will return the hashed version of our password, and we are going to use password, and we're going to use the default password algorithm. Password default, yes. Okay, so we have hashed the password, and now the last thing we want to do is we want to be able to save this new user who just registered. Okay, so to do that, we are going to call our model, and we're going to create this user. Basically, this is one of the functions that comes with an Eloquent ORM. So I'm going to have the name here, and let's see, custom. I'm going to call our custom request handler get param, and we're going to pass the request object and then the name property. All right, so I'm going to copy this right now, and let's just have a comma here, and then we are going to call this the email. Okay, so the email. All right, so we have the name, we have the email, and then next up is going to be the password, and the password is going to be set to our hashed password. And now once this is done, we can then set a response message and say new user created, right, successfully. Okay, and then we can now return our custom response, and this time around it's not going to be 400, but it's going to be 200 because everything went fine. So we have response, and then we have our response message. Okay, so this will do for registration. Now let's head over to login. So for login, so where the registration end, it begins, and now let's see. Yep. Okay, so for login, I'm going to have a new function here, public function login. So our login is exactly when we are going to be generating our token, and as usual, we need to pass our request and our response objects. All right, so our response. All right, so our request and our response object. So what we're going to do now is we are going to validate user input. So this validator validate, and I'll pass the request object, and then I'm going to pass the array of objects that we are checking out for. So the email must not be empty. Sorry, not null type. So must not be empty, and must be an email too. Okay, so the last is the password, and for the password, all we just want to be sure is that the password is not empty. So basically it's a string. So once we have validated this, then we can then check if this validator fails. So if this validator failed, all right, if it fails, then we want to have a response message, which is going to be all the errors. So I'm going to just say this validator errors, and now I'm going to return this custom response is 400 response. I'll pass the response object and then the response message. Okay, so if it bypasses this first one, then the second is we are going to check to see if this account actually exists. So verify account, and for verify account, I'm going to create a function that would do that for us in a second. But basically, this function takes a couple of parameters. The first one is the password. So we're going to call custom request handler get param, and for this I'm going to pass the request object, and then the parameter is going to be the password first, and then after the password the next is going to be the email. So I'm going to copy this right now, and let's just enter over into a new line, and then this is going to be the email. Okay, so now we have a function here called verify, which is verifying, and we have not created that function. Of course, we're going to create that function, but what is going to happen now is we're going to say verify account is false. So basically, this is not the user. Then we want to have a response message here saying invalid username or password, and then once this is certified, all right, we are then going to have a response message here. So this custom response, and is 400 response. So we're going to pass the response and then the response message. Okay, so if verify account is false, then we know this it's not his account. But if it is true, then we want to set our response message to be our generate token controller, and I'm going to call our generate token function. And our generate token function is going to carry our custom handler get param, which is going to be our email, which we basically set for it. So yes, let's see. The parameter that we're going to be passing here is the request. Sorry, the request, and then the key, so email. Okay, so basically here we are now generating the token, and now we are then going to return with the token. So basically this custom response is 200, and then let's just pass the response, and then the response message, which of course is or contains the token, JWT token. Okay, so now we want to create our verify account function that takes two parameters. It takes the password and then the email. So public function, right? The first one is the password, and the second is the email. All right, so for verify account, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually check if this email even exists. So we're going to say this user where the email, so once email is this email, so if the email actually exists in our data, all right, in our database, so we're going to count this. So if count, so basically if it is 0, which means it doesn't exist in our database, then I'm going to return false. All right, so the next thing we are going to check is going to be for the password. So I'm going to get the user, and I'm going to say this user, so basically where, and for this we are going to say email matches the email, so where the email, and then we're going to get the first value. So where the email is equal to the email that we have passed, and we're going to get the first value. So basically if the email actually exists, all right, then that means that we can get the whole user detail from the user email. And so once we have been able to do this, we're then going to call our hash password, which is basically the user password. All right, so the user password, or we could call this our hashed, not hash, hashed password. And then what we can then do is we're going to verify if that password is the same with what the user has entered. All right, so if the password that he registered with before is the same, authenticate him. Otherwise, then that authentication is failed. So I'm going to call hashed passwords, and right here you can see now we're going to check to see if this verify. So if verify is false, so basically if the passwords do not match, then we just want to return false too. All right, we want to return false too, and if all these credentials are met, then we want to just return true. Okay, so basically here what we're simply doing here is we're checking to see if the email is what the user has as his email, or sorry, if the email exists. If it doesn't exist, then we just return false. Else we get the, if it exists, then we get the user, and then we check also if the password matches. All right, so that's why we have verify account false. Then we can tell the invalid username or password. Okay, so now we have successfully set up our login and our register methods. What we are going to do now is let me get rid of Cassandra custom. We are not using you. So now what we're going to do now is we are going to head back straight to our route. So let me just route here, and in our route we want to basically set up our login and our registration. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to group this set of routes. So I'm going to call the group method, and the group method is going to group /auth. So /auth, and then I'm going to have a function here that passes our app instance. All right, okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up those routes, and I'm going to say for post we have our login routes here, login, and then the array is actually our auth controller, which is our class, and our function is, let's see, our function is what? Function is register, and then the second is login. Okay, so let me just pick up register first, and then is that register we're dealing with? Oh, sorry, we're actually dealing with login. So let me pick up login, or capital letter, and then we are also going to do the same thing too for register. So I'm going to copy this right now, paste this in here, and let's see, register, and here we have register. Okay, so we have been able to namespace our auth/login, auth/register, and in our middleware we have said that we want our login and our register endpoints to be ignored basically by our Jwt, by our Tupola package. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to head over and test those endpoints. So the first I'm going to be testing is the login. So if I or the register, let's test the register first. So I'm going to come over here and let's see /register. And for register, the parameters that we need for register, let's see, auth controller is just the name, the email, and the password, right? Just the name, the email, and then here is going to be the password. All right, so our password is going to basically be password, right? Our email, our name, our email, and our password. All right, so right now we have all this. If I hit on, this is going to be a post request, sorry. So if I hit this button, what do we get? We still have a false signature, and that is because we are not referencing the route correctly. It's supposed to be auth/register. So right now we have a 404 not found, and let's head back here. Why do we have a 404 not found? Let's go over to our route, and in our route right now you can see that we are missing out on our absolute, like, right, the absolute URL. So let's test that again, and yes, we have another error here saying a database error, which says let's see, right, truncated data too long for colon password at row 1. So the data is too long for our password column. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back over to user, and I'm going to edit this right now. And for passwords, let's see, I'm going to set this to let's say 255, and that should do right now. All right, that should do. And then I'm going to apply and revert and apply closed. Okay, so now if I hit that again, you can see that we have new user created successfully. If I head over to our database, which is our user database here, you can see that we now have a new user with the password. Okay, so now with this same user, we're going to try to log in to see what exactly it returns for us. And now I hit post, and our login, it says allow memory size byte exhausted, try to allocate. So let's see, let's head back over here to generate token. And the problem here is because we are calling generate token. So this is wrong. So it's actually we're supposed to call our secret key, not our function. So this will kind of create like a recursion, sort of like an infinite loop. And then it continues over and over again until our memory times out. All right, so I'm going to just call Jwt Secret Key. Yep, our Jwt Secret Key. And then the secret key, and this is our secret key. Okay, so now I'm going to head back over to Postman. And then if I hit this right now, you can see here that we have success of true. You can see that we have success of true, and then we have a response which actually contains our Jwt token. And now if I copy this right now, and let's see, let's call this comments, and I'm going to change this to create guests. All right, what I'm going to do now is write in the headers, right, we're going to have authorization bearer, and then I'm going to just pass this our new Jwt token here. Okay, and oh, sorry about that, guys. Paste that here, and now I'm going to send that, and here you can see we have guest entry data created successfully. Now if I were to uncheck this, and then I send that again, you can see token not found. All right, so if I head over to my database right now, and this is our user table, right? So let's just get our guest entry table, and you're going to see right here that we just created Pascal Donald comment of password. Okay guys, so this video is stretching and it's really long. I think I'm going to be ending this video right here. In the next video, we're going to be looking at how we can basically connect this application to a React front end, all right, and then see how we can perform the same operations, create guests, view guests, authenticate guests, and all that stuff. Okay, so see you in the next video. Thank you.